what I've done is I've got the vinyl laid out. I've inserted the pickups. Now you have to tape around them towards the base of the pickup sometimes in order to get them to stay in place properly. I do have rings. I'm going to do the rings, but I'm going to do the general layout of this first, and then I'm going to put the rings on and go ahead and airbrush the primary detail coat on with them. Right now I'm going to be starting with this lightish grayish blue color. You can kind of see what I'm dealing with here, and as I paint off to the side, that's pretty much where I'm starting. This will give me a good foundation that will look, rather light on the black, but allowing me to build up the lighter values when I come back in to obtain some of the extreme lighting that you'll find in this particular image. So I got a couple of reference points as I'm working. I find that the video works real good, or the static feed of the image. I'm going to start here with the eyeballs. Usually start with the eyes on these things and just get them out of the way. And right now I'm not really trying to create, a stenciled mask. I'm just kind of putting in the lightness and the values that I need for proper placement of the image, and I will be going back in and enhancing all that stuff later on. I don't know if it's going to be necessary to use a reverse of these and come back in and enhance some of the stuff like the eyes. I might come back in, take the small circular template towards the end and really tighten up the focus on the eyes, around the iris. And let's see, we got that. Now I'll start. The tricky part is that you can probably not see any of these lines in here in the cut, and I just rub my dirty finger on this here. You might be able to see them a little bit better. What I'm going to do is just go around a section at a time and kind of isolate these little squares, just kind of airbrush them off. Then I'll come back in and actually render this considerably. So I'm going to start at the bottom of the nose right here, and this is underlit, so meaning that the primary light source on this is coming from underneath on this, and the secondary is a little bit more ambient light from above and around. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to kind of work my way around. I'm going to leave some things in place, like all the needles and the pins and stuff, whatever you want to call them. They're all going to be left intact on that. And I had to make a decision about what I was going to do first. Was I going to do the needles, or was I going to do the background? But I think that doing the needles is actually going to make more sense on this particular project. A couple reasons about masking and re-registration and stuff like that. I think that would not be as clean doing it the way that I'm going to be doing it. But you could certainly have done it the other way. You just would have been required to come back in and put the mask over top of each one of those things, considering there's probably, I don't know, 80 needles on here. It would have been a real time consuming adventure. So I'm going to do it the opposite way to save time and maximize my efficiency with this project. So you can see, like, I'm just going over this really light, just enough to kind of define that edge. I want to be able to see it later when I start popping in the details. A couple of the pins came out, so I'm going to end up replacing those, and I saved them off to the side, and I actually can cut as many as I need, which is another nice thing about working with the plotter on a project like this. Now, a lot of people get all worked up. Well, he's working with a plotter, he's using a mask, blah, 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 blah. I don't want to get into the arguments of what's freehand, what's not freehand, but, I'm going to be using this as a guide from there on out. It's going to be pretty much freehand, so I'm not trying to rip anybody off by using technology that's available to me. I think there's a time and place that all this stuff can work to your advantage, and that's what I'm doing right now. Like I said, you probably wouldn't want to have to cut, even if you were to freehand these nails, it wouldn't look as good. I mean, you'd have to use some light stenciling some loose hand mask to really pull it off as well. I'm just going to kind of lightly pop that in. And come down here. Just going to take a little while to kind of unfold this whole thing and work it out. Make sure I get the edge. Really light coats right now. I'm just applying. I'm not really defining anything at all. I'm just going to kind of go around. And this is going to be quite boring for a little while, but at the same time gives you a perspective on how much work goes into this stuff. Okay, I'm not really going to even try to keep these things. Some of these things you could keep, but it's easy enough for me to cut another file if I need to. It's a beautiful sunny day here today in Colorado. Peel that, and I'm going to airbrush this in real lightly here. This will kind of give me a little definition on some of the, I guess, the slashes throughout the face. Kind of mapping them in for me as I'm going to be working a lot more diligently on detail here shortly. And I'll pan up a little bit on my image. Again, we're working with underlighting on this, so I'm just going to kind of emphasize that on my mask as I'm rolling around here. And I'm just setting up for a little, I don't know, mapping things out, setting up for what I'm going to be doing with this color to develop the image considerably more. I might even lighten it a little bit, which will easily wash out what I've got here. So I'm just not really focusing on any real detail at this time. I'm just kind of mapping it out. What I'll do after I get this all done, I'll probably wipe it down with some degreaser. The mask will leave a little bit of a static charge on the surface. When you start getting into the real delicate airbrush, you definitely don't want the static charge. It's even worse when you're doing stuff like fiberglass, some plastics. I like working on black, as most of you know. I just like airbrushing on a black base. I like developing the light from the darkness. And it seems to come together for me more in my head visually than the other way, which, you know, is fine. If you wanted to start with a white guitar, there certainly wouldn't have been anything wrong with that on this particular project. Just getting enough. See, I can just leave just enough of those edges in there that when I come back in, I can use those as a guide rather than feeling compelled to mask or tape. Some of the stuff you could probably do pretty nice with a brush. Some of these cracks and features in the face where the needles are inserted. More like a grid system that the makeup has. And then the needles are kind of like installed on the intersection of that. And that's what we were focusing on yesterday when we were doing all of the vinyl preparation and Corel Draw. Lightly putting in. It's going to look like a checkerboard when I'm all done. But it'll give me what I need to keep moving on in the project. And it's going to go pretty quick once I get this stuff off here. Now the mask on this character, or the art makeup, gets a little darker towards the top of the skull here, so I'll kind of keep that in mind as I'm airbrushing. A little lighter on this side actually, so I can get a little bit more intense with my application. Notice I'm going a little bit lighter on this side of the head. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be doing a lot more light work on this side of the head. I'm looking at the image as I'm doing this. I'm kind of getting a feel for, I want to get some volume to the shape prior to really going in and laying it out with the airbrush, doing the detail work. And this looks, you know, like a lot of work, but it really isn't. You're just kind of zooming around, peeling off pieces. And like I said, I'm not really too focused on creating a vivid image at this point. Happy little trees. You can do them however you want. They're your trees, your needles in your world. Create them as straight as you want, whatever size you feel comfortable with. It's
I'm gonna go get your puff, Ross wig.
Man, I watched the series so much when I was a kid in amazement. And when internet television came back around, I got to relive my youth, and I spent like, I don't know, probably 2 months watching every freaking episode. Even got Diana to sit down and watch them with me again. And then for a while, I was actually training myself on Procreate on my iPad, utilizing Bob's techniques, trying to keep up with him in a 30-minute segment, working with a digital program that I had no idea what the hell I was doing. But it was actually very fun, and I learned a lot. It was challenging, and we all kind of laughed at, you know, what I was able to do in 30 minutes on the iPad. And obviously Bob's lifetime experience as efficiently as he is with paint, it was definitely, I was falling way short of what he was able to do, but I enjoyed the challenge. It was a lot of fun. And I got to see Bob in action and enjoy all those old memories. It was good television when we were kids as artists. We don't really have that much anymore. Art programs in schools being dropped left and right. I'm very fortunate that my old high school has a continuing program under the guidance of Jan Pearson. I'm almost done with this particular aspect of the mask. I'm going to pop in the teeth here real quick. The only thing I'm going to be leaving behind are the shoulders and then the needles. The needles will stay in till the very end. They will be the last thing that I do. And for those who weren't around earlier, the reason why is because it's going to be easier for me to come back in and isolate those little guys with the work being done around. It's going to be a lot of contrast. Some of them require some white. I can use some loose shielding to define some of those edges, but most of the airbrush highlighting will be done with my detail airbrush, and I can get right in those and not have any real need to use any masking source to protect. There'll be that much development going on around it that it won't be needed. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and peel all of this back. And it's easier to get some of these smaller details out without peeling them up if you kind of come back at an extreme angle against the direction you're working. So let's go ahead and start with this detailing session. I'm going to first kind of feel out what this is going to, how it's going to produce in its full application at 100% opacity. I want to kind of get a feel for that. So I'm going to start with some areas. And this will take some time. It's going to be a lot of work during this phase. Oh, you know what? At this point in time, I pull these out to about the same height as my pickup rings. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put in 2 screws, one in each corner. I'll leave it loose so I can peel it up, and sometimes it's nice to be able to let some of the color blow back underneath there so you don't get any kind of lines around your rings. Alright, now I get the pickups on, pickup rings. Sometimes you got to work in here at an angle to get all those details on that stuff. Alright, now I just kind of placed in some of the wrinkles in the forehead just to get them out of the way. Now I'm going to start working around the bridge of the nose. A lot of these surface textures on the skin I'll actually kind of render like this, where I'm kind of randomly running around putting in some real soft, what I used to call pillow strokes and dots. Basically it's pointillism with an airbrush, but in a softer application, and all I'm doing is really setting up some of the texture that goes in to the design as I'm getting closer to being finished. And as I did on the sides, I have to kind of...
You can really see how you're just following your little mapping and adding the details to it.
Yeah, and I'm really kind of, same time, mapping it out still with the highlights. And I'll be doing quite a bit of rendering on this. Like I said, this isn't going to be a 2-hour picnic, a 4-hour tour. It's going to be an adventure for a little while. I always like to build these things up slowly, the values. I try not to get too hurried with them or go for a direct opaque application. Generally, even if it's going to be a full application, I'll start to map that out, but slowly bringing them up is how I'll approach all this stuff. A lot of texturing, and I'm sure a good portion of it was enhanced in Photoshop, but it is a great photograph regardless, and I'm going to be slowly working in all that texture. Even if I was going to do like a really extreme opaque application, I'll just start with some light gradual strokes, and then I come in and do some of the texturing. And this is all just what I would consider an underpainting. Some of it will be left intact, a very small percentage of it will be left as it is. More will be developed with lighter colors and the darker values as I'm moving along. A lot of this texture will be muted out. A lot of it will be enhanced again. Different phase of the painting with some lighter colors. Again, I'm starting with this color here. Even though it might look like I'm using white on the painting, it is actually a I don't know, what do you call it, a light dove gray, somewhere in
It's a
there.
little grainy. Is there a little green in there?
No, a little blue.
A little blue?
A little blue. I'm trying to get some of that cast from that background already kind of like built in. It's amazing how much this image is going to come to life when I peel this mouth out. It's going to make a big difference. Let me see how much the contrast of that really is important.
Indeed.
All right. So now I'm going to work with the teeth. And the underlighting is the key to this. And he needs to brush his teeth.
Really does.
Right now I'm just focusing on getting that light on the bottom part of the lower gum line and where the teeth meet the gums. Like that. There's very little else going in there due to the contrast adjustment on this image. So going up to the teeth up top. Fade that a little bit out as it goes towards the gum line, so it's going to stay lighter at the bottom. Remember, we're dealing with the underlighting here, so. All right. So you can see I've got a lot of things going on, and I think it really starts, even when you're working, you need to kind of like step back and away from it. Just to kind of give yourself a better overview of what's going on, what you're trying to create as far as the impact of the dynamics and the light. And you can see I still haven't really gone into full application yet. I'm getting close to it, right about there, and the nose area there too. This here is going to get considerable amount of light.
And for anybody who has joined us in session, yesterday we did a video on how Mike created the masking that he used and all the needles that you see, and that will be available, edited, and available up on YouTube later on today. It'll be the first part of the series.
Yeah, so it'll be a lot of stuff that this one is going to be quite time consuming, but it's a really good one to demonstrate a whole bunch of different techniques involving lighting, dealing with transparent color application, value, contrast, soft edge versus hard and refined taped edges. They all kind of work together in the image to make it what it is, and technique of using all those together is what's going to help us create the best likeness of this particular image.
Lovely. What a lovely day.
Yes, there we go, a little close up there. See how the pins all kind of set up the direction and the circular shape of the forehead. But anyways, it's starting to come along. Happy with the way it's working out thus far. Okay, so as I'm doing this, I'm conscious of this part of forehead remaining in the dark. And I'm really going to pop these things with some heavy flood strokes. Flood strokes when I just basically use my airbrush like a paintbrush and I just kind of force it to kind of puddle up on itself and become very heavy application. Air pressure is really, really low. going to be almost white over in this area when I'm done, but because I am using this slightly gray color, it gives me room. I like this particular project because one, I'm a fan, and two, it's such a strong image and it's just done so well. The photograph is just awesome. So, but other than that, man, you know, I enjoy like the rat fink stuff that I do with pen and ink. You know, I like doing the digital album cover stuff I'm doing too, and I like doing all of it. I enjoy it. I don't know. I'm cursed in some ways because I can't find myself necessarily content doing one particular thing. I enjoy having a broad spectrum of interests that keep me interested, basically. And right, that's about it. That's a long answer for a short question, but I think I needed to kind of spell it out a little bit before I just said this or that. You can see I'm really punching in some of these lines. I'm like putting it in there. I'll do some of the development of texture and all this, kind of spread it around. I want it to be balanced per se, and I don't want the texture just to be existing in one area. You know, I want it to be consistent throughout the painting, but usually I'll start with the perimeter of these shapes. I'll define the edges where they're separated. I'll come in and I'll do a light value over that, like I'm doing right now. I'll just come in here and I'm going to look at that edge on there, and I'll have a chance to do more adjustment in that when I get into my darker detail colors and stuff. Right now that I got that done, I'm looking at the piece and I'm taking into consideration as this thing moves up this way, it's getting darker. So bottom edge is a little bit lighter, it starts to get darker, and it picks up a little value towards the top. But this one also starts to get a little bit more darker as we're getting towards the forehead. So I want to make sure I get all that kind of embodied in it. I try not to, you know, do this stuff so I have to keep coming back in and working on top of my other work. I don't like stomping on it. And that's really a difficult thing to teach students, trying not to overwork their painting because they didn't necessarily complete the first step thoroughly. And then they're always having to compensate later on down the road with adjustments and application on darker values, if you were in this case overworking the lighter color. A lot more texture is being picked up as that light dissipates across that surface, and that's all you're really seeing in some instances is where the light's just passing above some of the surface little bumps and textures. And I'm developing a lot of the forehead wrinkles and that stuff right now. A lot of blues will actually be established in the next couple of applications of color. What I'm going to be doing is finishing up this with this value here, which, like I showed you guys before, is rather kind of a dove gray. I'd say about 30% gray. And then I'll start working my blues. Some of the stuff will get knocked back, so alright. And then I think on this side of the head, I'm actually going to start cutting that edge back. And you can start to see makes a little bit more sense in comparison where we have on this side of the edge, we have much more contrast of light up against the background color, which would be pretty much a solid application of blue. But over here, it just kind of helps feel this edge a little bit more as I continue on with the project. So I'm just going to go around and tune up some of these shapes and add some texturing here and there. I like doing a little Hellraiser right before Thanksgiving. Have an opportunity to redeem myself. Thanksgiving. This is a pretty brutal series of movies, though. I mean, when it first came out, I was just like, oh my god, that's hardcore. There was a definite shock factor to it. I think, you know, it's even gotten a little bit more macabre as the series went on, but it didn't have the same impact. The first couple I thought were just absolutely fantastic. Really quite shocking to watch. The effects were pretty good for the time. I mean, look at them now, it's like, but alright, I think that's a good point to call this video right there. We got the primary white laid out. I think that'll give people a chance. Actually, there's one more thing. I'm going to do this, I'll pull all the vinyl off except for the pins. So all I'm going to do now is just go along the edge of the shoulders, map that out, like so.